Tab Story 1. It was a quiet November evening in the secluded town of Pine Haven, nestled at the edge of the sprawling Bitterroot National Forest. Snow dusted the treetops, and a biting chill hung in the air. For the residents of the Pine Haven Retirement Lodge, the evening had begun as uneventfully as any other. Some gathered in the common room to play cards or watch television, while others, like 82-year-old Walter Green, retired early to their rooms. Walter, a retired logger with a wiry frame and a lifetime of stories etched into his face, sat by the window in his small room. He sipped his herbal tea, watching the forest darken under the fading light. The lodge's kitchen staff had just finished serving dinner, and the faint smell of baked chicken and mashed potatoes lingered in the halls. The aroma, unbeknownst to the residents, had traveled much farther than anyone could have anticipated. In the dense woods beyond the retirement lodge, a massive grizzly bear prowled, its breath visible in the icy air. The bear, gaunt from a harsh season and desperate for sustenance, had been wandering closer to human settlements in search of food. Tonight, the scent from the lodge kitchens had drawn it dangerously close. Walter's peaceful evening was interrupted by an unusual sound. At first, he thought it might be the wind, but the low grunting and heavy footsteps didn't match the rhythmic rustling of branches outside. Frowning, he set down his tea and shuffled to the door, opening it just a crack to peer into the hallway. A grizzly bear, its immense frame nearly filling the narrow corridor, was making its way toward the kitchen. Its fur was matted, its ribs faintly visible beneath its thick coat. Walter froze, his mind struggling to process the surreal sight. He had seen bears before, during his logging days, but never this close. Never inside. The bear's snout twitched as it sniffed the air, its powerful senses locked onto the lingering aroma of food. The beast moved slowly but deliberately, its claws clicking against the polished floor. Walter's hand trembled as he eased the door shut, heart pounding in his chest. He needed to warn the others, but the lodge's layout meant the common room was on the opposite end of the building, past the bear. Before he could act, the bear's movements changed.
Help me!
It turned its massive head and sniffed in his direction. The faint creak of Walter's door had caught its attention. Panic surged through him as the bear began lumbering toward his room. Without warning, it struggled sharply to right for the bear's door, unsuccessfully rallying itself one final time. Walter backed away, his legs unsteady. He glanced around the room, searching for something, anything he could use to defend himself. His eyes landed on his cane, leaning against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The bear reached his door in seconds. With a powerful swipe of its paw, it pushed the door open, the flimsy lock offering no resistance. Walter raised his cane instinctively as the bear entered, its dark eyes scanning the room. It let out a low growl, a sound that reverberated through Walter's very bones. "Get back!" he shouted, his voice shaking. He swung the cane, striking the bear's snout. The beast flinched but didn't retreat. Instead, it lunged forward, its claws raking through the air. Walter stumbled backward, tripping over his chair and landing hard on the floor. Pain shot through his hip, but adrenaline kept him moving. The bear's claws caught his arm, tearing through his sleeve and leaving deep gashes. Walter cried out in agony, his cane slipping from his grasp. The bear loomed over him, its hot breath filling the room. He braced himself, thinking this might be the end. In the room next door, Paul Atwood, a former rancher and Walter's closest friend in the lodge, had heard the commotion. Paul was a man of action. even in his 70s, and he didn't hesitate. Grabbing the shotgun he kept hidden under his bed, a relic from his ranching days, he rushed into the hallway. Paul's heart raced as he saw the bear's hulking form in Walter's room. He raised the shotgun, aiming carefully. "Get away from him!" he shouted. The bear turned, momentarily distracted by Paul's voice. It growled, its eyes narrowing. Paul fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The deafening blast echoed through the lodge, startling the bear. It stepped back, its claws retracting from Walter's injured arm. Walter, bleeding but conscious, used the distraction to crawl toward the corner of the room. Paul moved closer, keeping the shotgun trained on the bear. "Go on! Get out of here!" he yelled. The bear hesitated, its instincts warring between fight and flight. Paul fired a second shot, this time grazing the bear's shoulder. With a roar of pain and frustration, the bear turned and bolted, crashing through the hallway and out the back door. The sound of its retreat faded into the night. The lodge staff quickly sprang into action. Emergency services were called, and Walter was rushed to the nearest hospital, where doctors treated his injuries. Despite the severity of the attack, he was expected to recover, though the emotional scars would take longer to heal. For the residents of Pine Haven, the attack shattered their sense of security. The lodge had always been a sanctuary, a place where they felt safe from the outside world. Now, the thought of a bear breaking in during the night left many unable to sleep. Wildlife authorities arrived the following morning to investigate. They determined that the bear had entered through an open service door in the kitchen, likely left ajar by accident. The attack was attributed to the bear's desperation. A late-season scarcity of food had driven it to take risks it might not have otherwise considered. The incident sparked a heated debate in the community. Some residents argued for stronger security measures, including reinforced doors and windows. Others called for increased efforts to manage the local bear population, emphasizing the need for coexistence rather than conflict. Paul, hailed as a hero by the residents, remained humble. "I just did what anyone would have done," he said, though the memory of the bear's eyes, so full of hunger and desperation, haunted him. As winter settled over Pine Haven, life at the retirement lodge slowly returned to normal. But the scars of that night, both physical and emotional, served as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between humanity and the wilderness that surrounded them. For Walter, Paul, and the others, the encounter was a story they would carry with them for the rest of their lives, a chilling testament to nature's power and unpredictability. Story 2? The small town of Timber Ridge, Montana, nestled deep in the Rocky Mountains, was a haven for those who sought peace and solitude. It was the kind of place where the wild met the civilized, where towering pines surrounded quaint homes, and the call of nature was ever present. For George and Martha Warren, both in their late 70s, it had been the perfect place to retire. Their cabin, built with George's own hands decades ago, stood on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense forest. It was their sanctuary, their dream home. But on one fateful night, the peace of their secluded life would be shattered in the most unimaginable way. The evening began like any other. George, a retired park ranger, sat in his favorite chair by the fireplace, a book resting on his lap. Martha, ever the homemaker, was in the kitchen, humming a tune as she cleaned up after dinner. Outside, a gentle wind rustled the trees, and the faint howl of a distant wolf reminded them of the wilderness that surrounded them. "Storm's coming," George said, glancing out the window. The sky was dark, heavy with the promise of snow. Good thing we stocked up on firewood, Martha replied, joining him by the fire. They shared a smile, comforted by the warmth of their home. Neither of them noticed the faint sound of movement outside. A branch snapped, followed by the soft crunch of snow underfoot. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, an intruder in the night, drawn by the scent of food and the warmth emanating from the cabin. The Warrens retired to bed early, as they often did. Their modest bedroom, with its wooden beams and thick quilts, was a haven from the cold outside. George had just drifted off to sleep when a loud crash jolted him awake. He sat up, heart pounding, as the sound of breaking glass echoed through the cabin. "Martha, wake up," he whispered urgently, shaking her shoulder. She stirred, confusion clouding her face. "Shh! What was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. George reached for the flashlight on his nightstand and crept toward the bedroom door. The sound of heavy footsteps reverberated through the house, accompanied by a low, guttural growl. His stomach churned with dread as the realization dawned on him. A bear had broken into their home. He peeked through the crack in the door and saw it. A massive grizzly bear, its hulking frame illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the broken window. The animal's breath was visible in the cold air as it sniffed around the living room, its claws scratching against the wooden floor. It was searching for food, its desperation palpable. George's mind raced. He had encountered bears many times during his years as a ranger, but never in such close quarters. He knew their behavior, their strength, and their unpredictability. "Stay here," he whispered to Martha, who clutched the blankets to her chest. "I'll try to scare it off." "George, no," she protested, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to call for help." But George knew there wasn't time. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the bear's agitation was growing. He grabbed the old hunting rifle that hung above their bedroom door, a relic from his younger days. It was more for show than function, and he hadn't fired it in years, but it was all he had. So, slowly, he opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The bear's massive head turned toward him, its dark eyes gleaming with a mixture of curiosity and menace. George raised the rifle, his hands shaking. The bear finally made contact with George, and he reached for the... "Get out of here!" he shouted, his voice firm despite the fear gripping him. He fired a warning shot into the air, the sound deafening in the confined space. The commander stopped 10 feet away, cowering in a triangle of defiance. The bear roared, rearing up on its hind legs. It was a terrifying sight, its full height towering over George. For a moment, he thought the shot might have scared it off, but instead, it charged. The bear barreled toward George with astonishing speed, its claws swiping through the air. George managed to fire another shot, but it barely grazed the animal's thick hide. The bear's massive paw struck him, sending him crashing into the wall. The rifle clattered to the floor, useless. Martha screamed from the bedroom, her voice a piercing wail that only seemed to agitate the bear further. It turned its attention toward the sound, lumbering toward the bedroom door. George, dazed and bleeding, tried to pull himself up, but his body wouldn't cooperate. The bear pushed its way into the bedroom, the door splintering under its weight. Martha scrambled to the far side of the bed, tears streaming down her face. She grabbed a lamp from the nightstand and hurled it at the animal, but it barely noticed. The grizzly roared, its powerful jaws snapping inches from her face. George, summoning every ounce of strength he had left, crawled toward the fallen rifle. His vision blurred and his hands trembled. but he managed to grasp the weapon. With a desperate cry, he aimed and fired, the bullet striking the bear's shoulder. The grizzly let out a furious roar, momentarily retreating. But it wasn't enough. He tumbled down the hill toward the ground, but it wasn't enough. The bear turned back toward George, its eyes blazing with rage. It lunged, and the last thing George saw was its massive form descending upon him. The following morning, the snow had settled over Timber Ridge, blanketing the town in an eerie stillness. When the Warrens' neighbors noticed that smoke wasn't rising from the chimney as usual, they grew concerned. By mid-morning, a search party had formed. What they found was a scene of unimaginable horror. The cabin was in shambles, the furniture overturned, and the walls streaked with claw marks. George and Martha's lifeless bodies lay in the bedroom, their faces etched with terror. The bear, driven by hunger, had fled back into the forest, leaving devastation in its wake. The news of the attack spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the community. For a town so closely tied to the wilderness, the idea of a bear breaking into a home and killing its occupants was almost unthinkable. Wildlife authorities were called in to track the animal, and within days, the grizzly was located and euthanized. A necropsy revealed that it was severely malnourished, its body riddled with parasites. It had been driven to desperation by the harsh conditions of the season. In the weeks that followed, Timber Ridge mourned the loss of George and Martha Warren. Their story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the unpredictable and often brutal relationship between humans and nature. The town held a memorial service where friends and neighbors shared fond memories of the couple, their kindness, their resilience, and their deep love for each other. The Warrens' cabin was eventually rebuilt, but it stood as a somber monument to the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. For those who knew George and Martha, their memory lived on as a testament to the fragility of life and the enduring power of the wild. Years later, Timber Ridge residents would still speak of that fateful night, passing the story down to newcomers and visitors. It served as a stark reminder of the wilderness they shared their lives with, a wilderness both beautiful and unforgiving. For George and Martha, their love for each other and their home had remained unshaken until the very end, a legacy that would never be forgotten. If you found this video insightful, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for the latest videos on wildlife safety, survival tips, and fascinating animal stories. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next one.